Welcome back to State of the Nation. As the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, said at the budget, under Labour, national insurance is up, capital gains tax is up, inheritance tax is up, energy taxes are up and stamp duty is up. So perhaps it's no surprise then that inflation is now up too. Indeed, it's above the Bank of England's target rate of 2.3%. In less than 6 months since taking office, Labour's economic agenda has already failed. For months, Labour positioned itself as the party of stability and security. Indeed, Red Rachel tried to brand her economics doctrine as securonomics, and it was under this further piece of disinformation from Red Rachel that she aimed to build confidence around her and the idea that she could be trusted. She can't even be trusted with her CV, but certainly not with the economy. Let's look at the facts. When Labour took power, it inherited some of the strongest growth in the G7. But then it spent 3 months telling everyone we were all doomed, how awful Britain is. In spite of claiming they were going for growth, they endlessly undermined the economy and spooked the markets, deterring investment. This was followed by a raw socialist budget that attacked business and the creators of wealth. Worst of all is its £25 billion national insurance raid, a policy that broke its manifesto commitment. It's prompted the Bank of England, hardly a bastion of right-wingery, mainly a left-wing woke organisation, along with Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, Boots and Amazon, all to warn of job cuts and price rises. The price rises will then keep interest rates higher than they need to be. And this will affect you. This will affect households whose mortgages will cost more and will increase the yield on government debt, which will add to the burden of taxation. It's worth remembering when the PM said there was confidence in his mission from business, but today Ford announces job cuts across the country. Not only will we be a high tax, but also a high regulation economy. Only today the House of Lords has a bill in committee which will make it easier to adopt the European Union's rules and regulations, as if Brexit had never happened. And we know exactly what that means. More red tape, more regulation, less innovation, less entrepreneurship. When you compound all of these issues with Labour's disastrous handling of the farmers' inheritance tax hike, the fact that 100,000 pensioners have been dragged into poverty after Labour took their winter fuel allowance without giving any thought to the effects of it, so give the money to overpaid train drivers and their other friends in the public sector, mortgages and rents that are going to go up, it's become increasingly clear that Labour's economic agenda has failed in the way Labour economic agendas always fail, but this time within 6 months of taking office. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm delighted to be joined now by the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith. Andrew, thank you very much for coming in. To what extent is Labour simply dealing with problems that were left behind by the Conservatives? That is to say that expenditure is too high and tax is too high, but it was too high at the Conservative budget in March.
Yeah, look, and we were very clear, and Kemi, my leader, has been very clear that, we didn't get everything right. But I would draw an enormous contrast between trying to do the right thing, trying to bear down, as you and I were, on the costs, the level of public spending, get people to take risks, support wealth creators. So trying to do the right thing and sometimes inexpertly and sometimes being foiled by a machine that wasn't harnessed to do that. And actually an economic illiteracy to create a two-tier economy and making all sorts of decisions, both on the public spending side, pouring more money into unreformed public services, and then raising that money through a series of very inexpert taxes that are designed to create enormous pain on relatively small parts of the population, other than national insurance, which will affect us all. As you said, just when we'd got inflation under control, people could go back to the supermarket with confidence that their weekly shop wasn't going to increase. The actions that Labour are taking, and bear in mind most of them haven't even started. What we saw in today's inflation figures were really just the costs of high energy, and we know that energy costs in the UK are too high. The impact of the budget on national insurance, I've been talking to top bosses from the sort of organisations you talked about. They're either going to have to put up prices or they're going to have to pare back on the number of employees or the number of hours those employees do, and that's going to have a really big impact on inflation.
And the public sector is being feather-bedded at the same point, as you say. More
money being poured in. It's a two-tier economy, Jacob. That's what we're seeing. If you're in the public sector, not only are you getting big pay rises, but most of the public sector organisations are being cushioned from these rises by national insurance, by promises of more money, or indeed more money now. If you're in the private sector or if you're just an individual, a farmer, a pensioner, there's no cushioning at all. In fact, you'll see your bills go up. And if you're paying taxes, you'll see your taxes pay up. And if you're trying to pass on wealth to the next generation, Labour will help themselves to a slice of that too.
And as Shadow Business Secretary, what would you do to encourage growth? Because there isn't any room for tax cuts with the level of expenditure there is. You see with the attempt to cut the fuel allowance for the elderly that even making small cuts is politically extremely unpopular. How do you get the elusive growth in the economy that we need?
Well, the big answer to that is you've got to have reform. And you can't, no politician, and different politicians of different parties over the years haven't been fully honest about the state of the economy. The fact that as a country we are spending £100 billion a year and we have a very largely unreformed welfare service that is, again, consuming more and more money. And that's why Labour, one of the reasons why Labour are putting up taxes. So you've got to be serious about an agenda for reform. We need fewer, in my view, you need fewer civil servants. It's ultimately people that spend money, whether you were, as I was, running a business or whether you're running government. It's people that spend money. And if you have fewer people in our town halls, fewer people in Whitehall, then it is almost an inevitability that we will spend less money. But you also need to be ambitious in terms of welfare reform. We live in a society where too many people of working age could work, but they don't work. We did, actually, in fairness to the Conservatives, at the general election, we put forward a manifesto that reduced the size of Whitehall back to its 2016 levels, so hardly, cutting into a bone, but just, removing some of the largesse that had been added. And we also put forward an agenda that had significant billions of welfare reform. In the latest OBR books that were published at the time of the budget, there is not one penny of welfare reform. And so as a result, we're all going to pay more prices.
And then there's the issue of deregulating business. Now, the bill before the House of Lords today is perhaps the most boringly titled bill imaginable, but it's fundamentally important because it will provide a fast pipeline for new EU regulations to come in. Surely the opportunity outside the EU is to deregulate.
Well, absolutely. And that's an agenda that we were able to progress in some areas. We made some progress in, for example, financial services with creating our own rules. Which was your responsibility. Financial services. It was my responsibility, amongst others, and I was very proud of the work that we started. And in fairness to this government, they are actually carrying on with some of that because the city is so important. But we didn't make progress on things like product regulation, being able to recognise the standards of other, perfectly sensible countries like Australia or the US that have the same sort of issues. That would have been a benefit to business. It would have streamlined things. And of course, that whole corpus of health and safety, of regulations, it's not just before your viewers jump on in and say, well, Minister Griffith is saying get rid of health and safety. Of course not. Of course not. But we had health and safety regulations before the European Union. As a responsible government, you want to strike the right balance, but it is a balance. And then there's other agendas that you would have talked about, such as net zero, the environmental regulations. We just put, and Kemi talks about this, but we put more and more burdens on business. We never cost those. There's no budget of the regulatory burden on business. And then, of course, inevitably, we all pay a price in terms of either higher prices or businesses or an economy that just doesn't grow. And
it seems to me net zero is going to be one of the key battlegrounds in the next election because our energy prices are a multiple of those of our major competitors. We can't have an efficient economy with that. Do the Conservatives have the courage, the gumption, to challenge the green orthodoxy?
Look, I think we've got a leader. Time will tell, but I think we've got a leader who, when it came to, for example, the equalities brief, Jacob, who absolutely had the courage to challenge the orthodoxy, to call out Tavistock and Mermaids and these other organisations, and to develop and articulate a conservative answer to those questions. So energy is a big domain. How you actually allow business to cut through the thicket of regulation in a responsible way is another. And I'll tell you one more, which is employment law. And it's not about having a safety net in employment, but there is currently a 150-page bill, a trade union-inspired and authored employment bill. It's in my department, the Department for Business and Trade. And if by its own terms, it rolls back almost every piece of sensible, prudent trade union legislation since the end of the 1970s. So all of those bad practices that act as a cost and a brake on people trying to run businesses, looking after their staff, doing a good job, they're nevertheless going to have to cut through a thicket of red tape, more lawyers, more trade unionists, more people running red tape, and fewer people actually doing the business in an organisation.
And as a final brief thought, do you think that things have to be very bad before you can take really serious reforming action? That's what we had in 1979, and actually this government looks so bad, so failed in its economic policy, 2028, 29, the country will be ready for radical reform.
Look, I hope so, and that is absolutely our job. It is bad out there now, Jacob. We've got an economy that on a per capita basis could well tip into recession. We're 1/4 away from tipping into a per capita recession, despite a government that came into office having lied to the British people about its policies on tax. It's fiddled the fiscal rules, something you and I care a great deal about, because what we're doing is not just the tax that's being extracted now, but also the tax that will be a burden for the next generation. So I think it's bad now. I think you saw on the street yesterday, in one small subset of the economy, people realising what it looks like when a government is so antithetical to people who are trying to do the right thing in society. I hope we don't have 4 years like this as a patriot, but I really hope that we use the time in opposition to craft our arguments, explain to people why it will be different next time. Right? I think if we might earn the right to be heard, Indeed. And we've got to come up with clear plans.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed.